All right, super excited to be here. 13 years ago, I graduated from Bush, and excited to be back and share the journey of that last 13 years. I titled the talk True Grit. It's not this True Grit. I figured I could just play the movie for 50 minutes and then go home, but it wouldn't be a very good story. It's more about this guy and the last 13 years that ended up in that phase. I wanted to start, so I'm in technology. And technology is a funny industry. It's one where you read about in the newspaper Mark Zuckerberg, you read about Apple, you read about all these successes of these dot-com companies. This is the unicorn list from Fortune. So it's every private technology company that's worth $1 billion on paper. Most of them are not worth that at the moment. I think there's 157 or something of that. And we end up idolizing all these companies, and it seems like every company that's on that path is sort of in a rocket ship trajectory and nothing goes wrong, and how easy that must be to get there. You know, and then we make TV shows like Silicon Valley on HBO, where we just parody ourselves. And it's really easy to get caught in this thought pattern that, hey, this is really, it's fun and easy and simple and there's no struggle. And I think one of the things I've realized over the last 13 years is that that's totally a fallacy. It's any company that you start, any business that you're part of is a struggle because people are involved and people are hard. And nobody talks about it because you don't want to get up in front of the press and say, hey, my company's out of money tomorrow, but you should buy my product. So it just doesn't work. So just wanted to kind of talk about the last 15 or so years of my life and the path that I took, and then some of the lessons I learned from that experience. So where did I start? I started my story in '97. I was 13, living in Tacoma. I wanted to, what is this? Does anybody know what this is? Yes. I'm not that old yet. I wanted a CD player. And my folks said, awesome, go get a job. So I opened the newspaper, and I looked in the classifieds, and everything was like, hey, do you want to work at Orange Julius? And I was like, that sounds terrible. I don't want to do that. Or, hey, do you want to go sell shoes at the mall? Nope. And I said, okay, there's got to be a different way to do this. And recognized that I've been building websites just for fun as a hobby, I don't know, for a year or two. And there might be an interesting opportunity to go do that and get paid. I tried to find photos. You know, interesting tidbit, photos are so prevalent nowadays because you have your phone, and you have like how many photos on your phone right now? Probably 3,000, right? But it was really hard to go back and find photos of me back then. So I think this was close enough to '97. So I was going to school at Annie Wright down in Tacoma, and there'll be a theme here of brick buildings in the schools that I go to. And I realized I could hop on my bike, and I could pedal down to the dentist and sell them a website. So I did that, and I think I charged them $100. And this company, FusionNet Design Services, which is a horrible name for a company, horrible, was born. And I had at the time a little computer in my room and realized that, hey, now that I built this site, I need somewhere to run it, to host it. Why don't I just put it on that computer, and then I could charge them a monthly fee, and I did. And so that was the start of this journey. And did that for a couple years through junior high, and then in '99, I graduated from Annie Wright, and we moved up here, and I came to Bush. And when we moved, I had to take that computer in my bedroom that was running these websites for the customers that I built, and I had to move it up here. And in the process of that, I found another couple individuals in Seattle that were doing similar types of work. And I said, all right, how about we merge what we're doing, and we can all work together on a similar company. And so we did that. And we called it Ninewire Digital Solutions. I can't even remember the name of the company. I typo it in my own deck. Ninewire Digital Solutions. I looked like this. Apparently, I didn't know you could get a haircut. We're going here. There's another brick building. And so I ran that company for 4 years through high school. So, you know, after school, some people went and they did sports. I went home and I worked. I built websites. We ran the hosting business. We tried to grow this company with a couple other partners. And this was sort of my first experience into the challenges that exist in operating a company, again, because there are people involved in this business. And so there were 4 of us. I was, I don't know, 15, 16, and then everybody else was in their 30s. So that was a little weird. And we were trying to figure it out. We were trying to grow the company, and it was doing all right. It was doing all right. Today I look at it, and it's a little bit of a joke in terms of how much money we were making, but we were trying. We were doing, at that point, web development, web hosting. We did dial-up internet at that point in time when you still had to dial in. And we'd focused the business to sell to people that owned Macs. And so people that owned Macs that wanted dial-up internet in '99 was like your grandmother in the Midwest. And so that was our clientele. And so they'd call up, and I'd have to support them on the phone and try to get their computers working. And it was a hard business. And so ran that for 4 years and put my heart and soul into it. And then graduated from Bush in 2003 and spent that summer after graduation, right before college, trying to figure out what we were going to do with this company. At that point, we had what was called a T1 for our internet connection, and that T1 was $1,800 a month. We got 1.5 megs a second. So right now my home Comcast line is 150 megs a second for like $40 a month. So it gives you some relative pricing. We owed $18,000 to the vendor that sold us that T1. So we were like, 10 months behind on our bill. And that was a problem because if they turned off that connection, our business didn't exist anymore. And that didn't seem like a really great way to run a company to me. But my business partner and I, we had some disagreements at that point in time about who should get paid first, whether you pay your vendors first or you pay yourself first. And I was a big believer in pay your vendors first, and he was a big believer in go to Costco and buy a bunch of DVDs. And those started to really conflict. And so at the end of '03, right as I was starting freshman year of college, I said, this isn't going to work. And negotiated my way out of that company. We had, something on the order of like $70,000 in debt at the time. We had bought a building down in Federal Way. So I essentially said, hey, you take the building, you take half the customers, I'll take half the debt, and we'll go on our own merry way. You figure out your path, I'll figure out my path. And after a lot of struggle and cursing and anger at each other, we agreed to that. And I started Puget Sound in 2003, owing $30,000 for a business that was failing, trying to figure out what to do next. So that's how Blue Box was born. I think a lot of people say, hey, entrepreneurship, that's where you have this great idea and you go start this great company based on your great idea, and then you go become rich. And for me, I had no idea. I had a ton of debt and I needed to pay my bills. So I said, how can I do this? How can I get out of this hole? I'll just do the same thing that I knew how to do before. I'll start a development company again and do some of that small-time hosting. So this was my dorm room at Puget Sound down in Tacoma. Notice the brick building. There's the third one. There's a theme here. And I said, all right, I need to start a company. So I walked down to the Tacoma City Planning Department and said, I need to get a business license. And they said, great, what's your address? And I gave them the dorm room. And they said, we've never done that before. So I had to go through a special exemption process to get a business license issued for a dorm room, which is the first they've ever done. Had to go apply to get a merchant account so I could take credit cards from our customers. I remember the merchant company, when we opened the account, they sent me a congratulatory bottle of wine to my dorm address, which showed up at the mailbox at the college, and they gave it to me, and I was very excited about that at the time. So I found this. Archive.org, side note, archive.org is a really incredible project that basically saves pictures of any website going back decades. So this was our original website, which really makes me laugh today. So we started Blue Box. I started Blue Box. It was the same kind of process. We'll do development work. I'll host the websites. I remember the first sort of weekend that we were in business, I sat in a parking lot at an event I was at, taking computer pieces and assembling them together to build the server we were going to use, which ended up going in this rack. This is a current photo of the rack, but it's the same spot at the top floor of this building, which is the Westin Tower in downtown Seattle. So you pull back the curtains behind these servers, and it's got the most amazing view you've ever seen of the lake. And then you close them because the sun would get in and heat up the server room. So that's where Blue Box started, and grew it over first couple years, 2003, 2004, 2005, trying to build out an actual web development company. I went to go hire software engineers, and I tried to hire salespeople, and I said, hey, we're going to go build more of these applications for customers. At one point, we tried to build a product that we would sell to used car dealers, which was a terrible business market. And we were just kind of limping along. It was paying my bills every month. It was doing all right, but it wasn't particularly exciting. There wasn't a huge, great idea. We moved into the second floor of this building in Tacoma, above the Birkenstock store. At one point, somebody, see that gray trash can? Somebody lit that trash can on fire one night, and it almost burned the building down. So I realized I probably should go get insurance, which I did. This was my desk. And on my 21st birthday, I was actually up here. I was up here for the Northwest Entrepreneurial Network. They had a meeting that night when we were up celebrating. Go back home, go to sleep, wake up in the morning, come into the office and realize that, oh, somebody has come in and stolen all of our stuff, all of our computers, everything out of the office, which was not the most awesome thing ever. And we had backups. It's like, great, we'll go to the backups. Oh, wait, those backups were in the computer that they stole. So that was not particularly useful for me, and it was a pretty frustrating experience. For one, so fortunately, because of that trash can experience, I'd had insurance, and the insurance company actually paid. They paid for all the time to go redo all that work that was in flight waiting to be delivered to customers. So that was a saving grace, but we were able to use that money as an opportunity to essentially say, what business, or I was able to use that money as an opportunity to say, what business do I want to be in? And I realized that was not, the development business, building projects for customers was not the business I wanted to be in. It was not something I was super passionate about. It was a pretty frustrating business because anytime you finish a project, you hand it over to a customer, and then anytime it breaks for the next 5 years, they call you up, and it's still your problem, and they want you to fix it for free. Like it's not particularly rewarding. But the hosting portion of the business that we had built up, the piece where we were running the websites for customers, I found that really interesting. I'm a big car head. I love to race cars. And at that point, I was working on cars. And there's something really fascinating about getting your hands on something tangible and being able to tweak the engine and see the results. And I found the hosting business very similar to that because it was a real-time 24/7 activity, that I'd be able to change things about what we were doing and see those results immediately. So I said, all right, maybe we could go do that full-time, and maybe I can make a business out of that. So I ended up firing the whole team that we had, the engineers, the salespeople, went back to myself. And right around this time, I actually met this wonderful woman, Rebecca, who's now my wife. And so she got to kind of witness the beginning of the insanity that was kind of the rocket ship of Blue Box. Moved out of that Birkenstock office into my home office. I showed my wife this photo last night. She's like, why do you have 4 trash cans? What is going on? I was like, oh, I had a lot to throw out. And so began the process of building the hosting company. Let's see what this next slide is. It's blank. Oh, I know what it is. Okay, so began the hosting company. So this is 05 going to 06. At this point in time, we'd built a bunch of relationships with other development companies that were building applications for their customers, and they needed a place to host them. At that point in time, we think of like cloud computing today with Amazon and Microsoft and Google. These companies didn't exist yet in that capacity. Rackspace was a company at the time that was sort of the predominant leader in the field, but they were super expensive. So we sort of figured, hey, there's an opportunity here to go focus on the hosting business and try to make a run at this. And in late 05, one of those companies that we were partnered with from a development perspective landed a contract with Viacom. So Viacom is the parent company that owns VH1 and MTV and BET and Comedy Central and like they have a ton of channels. And at that point in time, Viacom had made the decision, or actually MTV had made the decision to go build one website sort of per TV show. They were going to build this big digital strategy. And these were things for like casting calls for I Love New York or Real World, like really awesome TV shows that everybody should watch. Not so much, but they would cast people to put on these shows through these sites. And the plan was, hey, we're going to go build a property for every TV show and come up with a way to make money that way. And so the development company that we worked with landed the contract to build those sites. And they said, well, hey, we host with a company called Blue Box. You should probably go host with that company. And so I get a call, and they say, hey, we have a contract for you. It's from MTV. And I said, awesome. That's going to be great. And they said, all right, now you need to go through a vendor audit. And I said, not awesome. That is going to be a problem. And so MTV sends over this vendor audit, and it's this like 4-page form, and they're like, how many employees do you have? And I'm like, well, I've got myself, I've got my girlfriend, I've got my cats, we'll count my mom. I think we're at like 4. All right, we got 4. And we somehow passed this vendor audit, much to my surprise, and we landed this account, and that became sort of one of the pivotal moments in the history of the company that allowed us to get to where we are today. I can go back and I can point to probably 10 of those, say without that having played out exactly as it did, we wouldn't have been here. So, let's see if this works. Oh, I'm going to have to click it a million times. So, it was way more funny last night when I was building it. Hold on. Here we go. Yes. So, we got this account, which was great. They were going to pay us a ton of money a month. But at that point in time, the business was essentially, we bought physical servers, like we bought computers, we stuck them in a rack, and then we charged the customer a monthly fee. And these projects with MTV, they were advertised at about 3:30, right when everybody got home from school, and they would go from no traffic to like an insane amount of traffic to no traffic in 15 minutes. And they needed a lot of server capacity. So we had to go buy a lot of servers. And I was not exactly flush with cash at that point in time. And so I needed to go figure out how to go actually buy those. And that became sort of the next step of the journey. We had no investors. This was just me, right? Remember, I had started with all that debt. At this point in time, I'd finally paid that debt off. But we weren't particularly flush with cash. And so I had to figure out how to go actually buy all this equipment. And if you name a way to get money, wait, don't do that. That'll be terrible. I used almost every source that you can think of as a way to go get money. So I used my credit cards. I borrowed money from my family. I borrowed money from my girlfriend at the time. I used a home equity line of credit. I had bought a house. This was 2000. At some point, we were getting into 2007, so the real estate market was booming. I was able to buy a house. I was able to borrow money off of that. We got small business administration loans. We got lines of credit from the bank. So at the beginning, like I was personally guaranteed for all these funds. So if the company goes belly up, like great, the company's bankrupt, and normally like you can be fine. You go start your next thing with whatever assets you had. With a personal guarantee, if the company goes bankrupt, the bank then comes after you for the money. So at the beginning, I was like, ooh, I got to sign a personal guarantee for 50 grand. Like, that's a lot of money. And then it was like 250 grand. I was like, oh. And it was 500 grand. I was like, ugh. And then it was like $1 million, and I started laughing because I was like, oh, yeah, go for it. Like, I have no money, so what are you going to get? At one point, it got up to $4 million in personal guarantees, which I thought was hysterical. But it was a really hard period of time for the company because we were growing so fast and we needed so much money that it became a game of not could we get access to capital, or not how much did the capital cost, how much were we going to pay in interest, but could we get access to that money at all to survive? And I have all kinds of photos of the servers, which are boring, but this is sort of what it started out like before the MTV thing started to grow. So things are going well. I graduated from Puget Sound in 2007, and Rebecca and I started to get more serious. The this is another awesome photo I found. I moved down to California with her. She was going to grad school at UC Berkeley. And so I left the company. It was running here actually in Tacoma at that point in time, and I moved down to California. And I'd come back up every once in a while. And then in the beginning of '08, we decided to move back to Seattle. This was our office in Tacoma at the time, so I did the reverse commute from Seattle to Tacoma, which was not awesome. And we were cruising along. I think we did something like $125,000 of revenue in '05, and then like $250 to $300 in '06, like $450 in '07, like $900 in '08. So we were kind of on a pretty good clip. But then '08 happened. And '08 was not my favorite year. And it started a trend that repeated itself over and over and over with our largest customers. So MTV at that point had grown to become 60% of our business, which was awesome from the revenue perspective, but was not awesome when they called to say, hey, we've changed our strategy and we are turning off all of these applications we've built for each TV show, which became like there goes 60% of our revenue out the door. What are we going to do? We were right in the middle of '08 of moving our data center. So at this point, we had grown large enough that we needed to move to Seattle. So it became this big struggle. How do I go replace that revenue? And if you looked at the finances, because we had all of those loans, like if we didn't replace that revenue, the company was out of business. And when the company was out of business, I was personally bankrupt because of all those guarantees. And we got really fortunate that at the same time that they were doing that, and at the same time with the depths of the financial crisis, social gaming started to get very popular. So games on Facebook were just beginning to come into their prime, and we had landed an account or two with some of these gaming customers, and they would go kind of same pattern that Viacom would do, where they would start very small, and then all of their growth would occur, and they'd buy a bunch of stuff. And we had all this stuff because we had all the servers because MTV had used them. So we were able to help those customers grow. So we got really lucky that right as one customer was leaving, sort of another customer would come in and fill that gap. And then that customer would grow to be 40, 50% of revenue. And then they would leave because they would get bought. And we got into this pattern where we'd get one large customer, they'd grow very big, very quickly, they'd get acquired, and then they'd leave. And that became sort of the '08, '09, 2010, like repetitive process. In '09, we finally moved the offices from Tacoma up to Seattle, so I didn't have to do my commute anymore. And that was the year that I got married, which was awesome. And it begins the period of time I kind of call the slog. So, and it's like the slog at work, not at home. Home was great. So we were trying to figure out how do we fix this pattern with these customers? How do we get out of this loop of losing this business over and over and over? Because it was really a bummer. And I was starting to get pretty down. Like I didn't have any ideas. I didn't know how to get out of that pattern. And so in the midst of that, we decided to have a kid. This is probably a better photo. And so our daughter was born actually 4 years ago today. Today's her 4th birthday. And so it's like, all right, work's not going great, so now's a really good time to start a family. But it was actually nice because it provided an opportunity to do something that wasn't necessarily work. It gave a different focus at home. But I realized through that time period that trying to continue to be a bootstrap company, trying to do this with only my money, was going to be very difficult long term. And realized that business that we were in, just of the hosting portion, wasn't going to be particularly lucrative for long term. This is now 2009, 2010, 2011. Amazon Web Services, who many people are now familiar with, was just getting started. They were actually getting great traction. We recognized that was going to be a problem for us down the road. So we needed to figure out a path. To move forward. But we owed all this money in these servers, And so I realized I needed to go build a product. I needed to build something that we could have an engineering team working on and put a specific amount of effort into one thing and have that one thing be stamped out over and over and over to make our money. And so I went to go raise venture capital. And I started, I think, in 2011. And everybody said, you're going to have a really hard time raising money. Because we didn't fit the mold. The company was old. We'd been around for a long time, 7 years. We had a bunch of physical infrastructure, which wasn't very popular at that point in time. We had a bunch of debt, which wasn't very popular. And actually, if I go look at the fundraising deck, I had some weird obsession with cartoon robots. And so the deck was full of, it was the worst deck ever. So we went to go use that deck to raise money. And I went and I think I pitched 47 investors in Seattle and in the Bay Area. And I did it all backwards. Like I would set up a meeting in Seattle in the morning, in the Bay Area in the afternoon, and then another meeting in Seattle the next morning. So I was literally like flying up and down the coast for 2.5 weeks doing all these meetings over and over. I think I had 16 flights in 14 days or something goofy. And we pitched 47 investors. We got 47 no's. Of those 47 no's, I had one firm come back and say no, and it's because your team's not that great, your idea's not that great, and you don't have enough revenue. But we like you, so if you can fix those things, we'd love to talk with you. That made me really mad, really mad. But after about 2 or 3 months, I kind of stepped back and realized, all right, to be fair, the executive team we built didn't have experience running venture-backed businesses. That pitch deck was atrocious. And our revenue was, I think we were $4.5 million at that point, which was, I felt that was impressive, but they could get bigger, I guess. So kind of went back into that funk, was trying to figure out how do I actually go get money for this thing. And I went and I found this individual. I really wanted to be CEO of the company at that point. I thought, hey, maybe I can go hire a CTO who could help kind of guide the technical vision of the company, and I can keep running the thing. And I was really stuck on that idea. And so I found this guy, and he seemed great. He worked for one of our competitors at the time. He was really energetic. He seemed to have all the same ideas that I had. So I brought him aboard as CTO in October. Let me get all my years wrong of this. I think it was October of 12. And we went and we tried to go raise a round again. And so at that point, we had a new executive team. We had more revenue. The story was different. I went, I think, that year and pitched to 28 investors. I got 27 no's. And the one company the year before that had said, no, but here's the things you need to go fix, they actually said yes. And so we raised, at this point in time, it was $4.3 million, I think, in total in that round in a Series A. We closed the second, we did it in two tranches. We closed the second tranche in December, I think it was like December 12th of 12. December 18th of 12, our largest customer, so we're doing $9 million in revenue at the year. Our largest customer, who was $3 million of that, said, hey, we're leaving. And by the way, we're leaving like by the end of the year. So really fortunate that we just brought in $4 million. Not so fortunate that that revenue is leaving. And so again, it kind of started that pattern. At that same time, we just kicked off a giant data center migration to move all of our equipment. It was going to be a very costly thing that our CTO had insisted was the right thing to do. So we're in the midst of all that. We get into February, and I realized that sociopaths are not super awesome. So that CTO ended up being a total fraud and embezzled $50,000 from the company. Fortunately, he was not very smart when he did it. He used our corporate credit cards to go buy $6,000 worth of wine, along with a bunch of other stuff. So it was very easy to catch, but it was not a great vote of confidence. So we had to fire that guy. We had an off-duty security officer, off-duty cop who came with us the day he was fired. That's its own story in its own right. And so here I am. Remember, I was struggling trying to figure out the direction of the company. We had just raised a bunch of money from outside investors. A week after they invest, we learned the largest customer is leaving. And then 2 months after they invest, we learned one of the members of the executive team was a sociopath, fraud, and had just been fired. So not super great to go sit in the board meetings with our new investors at that point in time. But again, that was one of those pivotal moments in the history of the company that actually, if it hadn't have played out that way, we wouldn't be here. Because that CTO was so good at manipulating people and smooth talking that he had convinced me, he had convinced the investors, he convinced the rest of the executive team on our ideas. And I think I was so down from having struggled for so long with this thing that I don't know if I could have done it without his help. So to some extent, I just look at that $50,000 that he embezzled as a small price to pay for actually having raised $4.5 million. But now I had to clean up his mess. So we finished the data center migration. As you can see, the data centers are getting fancier and fancier. And we found another gentleman from HP who was pretty excited about the idea that we had come up with and was able to come aboard in May of that year to join the organization. So now we're 10 years into this thing. This is our 10th year anniversary photo. This was the first company party that we had where a bunch of people had kids. So I remember that as a pretty interesting point in time. Like, we had been hiring a very different profile of employee. This was one of the best company events we actually ever had, or had to this day. So we're 10 years in. We are running out of money. The product we have isn't really built, and we're trying to figure out what to go do next. Keep in mind, all this is happening in this insulated bubble. Like, you can't go tell the press all these things. You can't go tell all your employees all the nitty-gritty details of the struggles that are happening behind the scene. As the CEO or the founder of the company, you've got to manage through all of those pieces on your own, and that is a hard thing to do. So that summer, we realized we got to get this product to market. We have some idea of what it is, but we haven't really got it built yet. So we try to go figure, hey, maybe we could sell this thing before we build the product, and then we'll know what the customers want. And we ended up landing our first customer for the product that we built before we had a single line of code on that product committed in that summer, which was a pretty amazing accomplishment. Like, we had literally nothing to show them, and they bought it. And so we spent kind of the next 45 to 90 days scrambling and getting the product built. And we called it OpenStack on demand at that point, and we had our first customer, and we had the product ready to go. This was an image we did for a show in Hong Kong that we announced the product at. And so we said, all right, now we're cruising. We've got a product, we've got the team, we've got an idea, we're cranking. And the challenge was the cash was starting to dwindle to the point that we were basically bankrupt. So remember, we had raised $4.5 million. We had $3 million of revenue walk out the door essentially as soon as we'd raised that capital. And we started hiring. I made some bad decisions as a CEO, and we started hiring very quickly. And we were out of money, like dead broke out of money in October of that year. So I was able to convince the investors that we had at the time to put in another $1.5 million in what they call a bridge note. So it's another investment without great terms. That carried us for a while. But it was a pretty hard time. I was feeling very much like a sad panda. I wrote a whole blog post actually about that point in time in my life. Like, I struggled with depression in a big way for about 6 months through this process. But we kept on trucking. Like, we had to keep moving forward. We had to keep moving forward. That $1.5 million, I just put this in because I thought it was hilarious. That $1.5 million carried us until February. We were out of money again. And at that point in time, I was really struggling. Our VP of sales had decided to quit while I was in that trip in Hong Kong. He basically said, hey, you need to take a look and figure out if you want to be the CEO of this company or if you want to have another role, which again made me really mad until I thought about it for a while and ended up being another one of those very pivotal moments. And so we had to go back and raise more capital. Well, when you're out of money is the worst time to try to go raise money. You should raise money when you don't need it, so then when you do need it, you already have it. And we had to go try to do this in a very quick time period. Was able to find a group in Seattle that raised us. We raised $3.2 million, some of which had to go to pay off some of that debt we had, so it gave us about another $1.5 million in usable cash. And literally that loan closed. I was on the phone in the parking lot outside the hospital as we were having our second kid. So not a super awesome time in my life, but again, having that kid was a great way to kind of step away and think about what was important. So that comment that VP of Sales had made really started to get to me, and I started to think, hey, maybe it is time for me to try a different role in this company. Maybe I've grown the company as far as I can take it, and I can add value into this organization in different ways. And so I decided to go hire a CEO. And I began that search and spent about 5 months interviewing a bunch of folks and found a great guy named Matt Schultz who had just sold the company he was part of back in November. And we hit it off in a great way. And this photo is really meaningful for me because this was the night before we announced the new CEO had joined the company. And I just had won the GeekWire Entrepreneur of the Year Award for the GeekWire Awards. And that was our son. He was 3 months old. And so it was really, it felt like a crowning achievement, right? Here I am about to hand the reins over of the company I built to somebody else. And the night before I do that, I'm awarded this award. So Matt comes aboard. He's the gentleman on the left. He brought a couple other members of his executive team with him. And finally felt like we had kind of a cohesive group that could help get this thing done. Like we were all, this is the first time I felt like everybody was really an amazing contributor for the stage of the company that we were at the time. And that we had an opportunity to do something really meaningful. And through that group, that summer, we were able to go raise another round of funding. So that $1.5 million that we got in February carried us through. We actually made it all the way to October, and we raised another $10 million in October. The funny thing about this funding is that we actually, going through that process, the company that invested that money gave us an offer to buy the company. And the offer to buy the company was for a value that was 3 times less than if they invested in it. So Angie said, if we own you, you're worth 3 times less than if we just invest in you, which I found comical at the time. So we raised this $10 million, and we started to get cranking, and sales are starting to go. And we get into October, November, December of that year, and we start to get approached by a company that says, hey, we're interested in buying you. And at that point in time, it was a private company, so it would have been a stock-for-stock deal. Illiquid stock. We wouldn't have been able to get cash out at that point in time. Didn't seem like a great opportunity, right? We've spent 12 years building this company. We've got 14 million or 18-ish million into it now. Trying to trade all that for stock in somebody else's company that you then have no control over didn't seem awesome. But what that did do was start sort of a process that we were able to use to go shop the company around and see who else in the market was interested. And through this sort of circuitous chain of people and events, I was able to get a connection into IBM. Started with a friend who said, hey, I think IBM would be really interested in what you're doing and building. You should probably go talk to them. And sort of 3 or 4 meetings later, I ended up in Vegas at their big conference and met kind of a bunch of the executive leadership in the cloud team, business unit, and lo and behold, they were interested in what we were doing. They thought we could really help their cloud strategy. And that became what was a 100-day sprint from the beginning of February until June 2nd, which is the process of selling the company to IBM. This was, I think, 3:30 in the morning, the night before the deal closed. That's Bob. Bob, who's kissing me, ran the whole deal process, so he was thrilled that we were done. This is actually the next day, closing the deal. This is about noon. You could see everybody's thrilled except for Bob. Bob looks like he's about to have a heart attack. In fact, we got the defibrillator we had in the office out just in case. But here we are actually closing the sale of the company to IBM on June 2nd. This was, I think, that afternoon or the next morning, announcing it to the whole team. And this is one of my favorite articles, which was IBM stock up after Blue Box acquisitions. Actually, the market cap, the value of IBM moved $500 million that day, which probably had nothing to do with us, but I'll take the credit for it anyway. And so that was a pretty amazing feeling at that point in time, right? So here we go from 12 years of sort of perpetual chaos to being done. And I was in a big daze for a number of months. Going through that process was pretty fascinating because, again, much like the previous 12 years, even though it was only 100 days, you had essentially 12 years worth of stress and uncertainty compressed into 100 days. In fact, the deal almost died about 3 hours before it was supposed to be closed because there was a gentleman who didn't like something that his lawyers had negotiated, and he wanted to redo all of it 3 hours before the deal closed. And so it was a pretty fascinating experience, and continue to feel incredibly fortunate that we were able to make it that far. Incredible gratitude to the CEO that I brought in. That was one of the, again, most important decisions that I made because it allowed me to get back into that CTO role. And in that CTO role, I was able to get out in front of our customers. I was able to get out in front of the media. I was able to get out in front of potential companies that would be interested in buying us. And we built a brand and brand awareness for the company that we never had before. And without that, we never would have got the eye of these companies to approach us to be bought in the first place. We never would have got the deal done. So, with 9 minutes left, that was compressing 13 years of Blue Box into 40 minutes here. So I want to share some lessons that I've learned from those experiences. And the first is what I call archive artifacts. And actually, I took this phrase from a conference I was at a couple weeks ago. And it means that in everything that you do, whether it's in life or in business, like there are stories that are being created all the time. And being able to save artifacts about those stories, whether it's like those news articles or it's photos, like those are some of the most important things. Trying to go back and create these presentations, you know, it brings back so many memories just scrolling through kind of all those materials. And I think, like, what do you do in life? You go through experiences, and remembering those experiences, I think, is one of the most important parts of growing up. Second, build your brand. So what do I mean by this? I mean that the way you represent yourself publicly, like the world has changed. The way you represent yourself publicly on the internet is one of the most valuable things that you can, that you have direct control over and that you can grow. And so whether it's Twitter, whether it's Facebook, whether it's LinkedIn, whatever like social media tool or process that you're using, think about how you're presenting yourself publicly. Like, again, getting into that CTO role, I was able to use Twitter to get a bunch of credibility that I don't feel like I actually deserve, but was able to generate through that service. And again, without having that credibility, we never would have been approached by the organizations that we were. So those are the two softballs. The third is that entrepreneurship is a really lonely journey. So having gone through this now for so many years, I think one of the challenges, and I made a mistake in that I was a sole founder. So I had no co-founders running these companies with me. And so as a sole founder, when things are really challenging or really low or really hard, there is nobody to go talk to. You can't go talk to your team at work because sharing the level of despair or how broken the organization is at certain periods of time does not exactly instill confidence in them to stay with you, right? You're sort of stuck. It's your company. Everybody else in the company has the ability to go elsewhere. You don't really want to go home and share how broken everything is every night, although it is really important to share to a certain extent with your spouse, but that can become a big downer. You don't really want to share it with your friends because your friends don't necessarily understand the trials and tribulations of what you're going through. And so it becomes a very insular process. As I was going through this, I found an organization in Seattle called Entrepreneurs Organization, which essentially is a self-help group to some extent of entrepreneurs, and allowed us to create what we called a forum of 9 or 10 of us that would meet monthly in a totally confidential setting with other business owners who are all going through similar things. And that's what really helped me get through some of those darkest years, was being able to talk to other people that were going through very similar experiences. Does anybody know who this is? Steve Jobs? Who about this? Yeah, who about this? No, this is Horowitz, from Andreessen Horowitz. So what do those three people have in common? They're all men, yeah. I actually was thinking about that last night and was working to find a photo of a woman, but I failed at that. So shame on me. The reason I picked all of these is because each one of them has a book that essentially trials their history of sticking with it. And so if you go read Steve Jobs' biography, if you read the biography about Elon Musk, or if you read The Hard Thing About Hard Things, each one of these entrepreneurs has gone through the same struggles that anybody that runs a company goes through and talks about it. And the key about each one of their experiences is that they didn't give up. That each day, no matter how hard that experience was, they woke up, they came to the office, they kept working on the problem. And that's one of the most defining characteristics of me, of an entrepreneur. When you're running a company, things can be incredibly hard. And ensuring that you show up every day, that you keep moving forward, that's how you keep your company running. A good friend of mine did a keynote a couple years ago and presented this picture. And this is sort of a graph of the return on your investment versus the effort that you put in. And he's trying to say sort of at some point you could quit at the very beginning and you'd get a lot of return for the effort you put in. If you kind of quit in this period called the dip, that's not a great period. If you quit at the end of the dip, that's awful. And then at some point, hopefully the experience gets better. Oftentimes, I think people think, hey, I'm going to start a company and just every day it's going to get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. I kind of made my own diagram of what it can look like. And I think the reality is that you have no idea how good or bad things are going to be. And the variability of that experience changes on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, week-by-week basis. Sometimes you'll be successful. I feel incredibly fortunate now, having watched a number of friends' companies not make it, that we were able to actually have an exit for Blue Box. So sometimes the graph actually looks like that. But it's important to remember that it really is a roller coaster. And it can be incredibly important one day and incredibly depressing the next. So the last point is to surround yourself with the A-team. And like everybody says this, and it's such a goofy thing to say, like people are like, oh, you have to only hire A players, only hire the best. Which, like, yeah, that's important. But I think that the key for me is like thinking about who are the influences on your life, whether it be professionally or socially, and really choosing people that choosing people that represent where you want to be and surrounding yourself with them became really important for me, whether that was through the entrepreneurs group or in hiring our executive team. So, and it's a constant process. Like you always have to be reevaluating who that group is. I think through Blue Box's 13-year history, we had, I don't know, probably 14 different executives that worked at the company. And they were all great, wonderful people, and I have incredible appreciation for what everybody did through that process. But at each stage of the company, we needed a certain set of skills, and at each stage of the company, I had to go think through what set of skills that was and which individual could contribute that. So, in closing, this is one of my favorite quotes. Opportunity is missed by most people because it is dressed in overalls and looks like work. You know, I think the most successful people in this world are those that refuse to give up, that recognize that every morning they're going to put in the most effort they can that day, that they're going to put their best foot forward, they're going to be most proud about the work that they're producing. And those are the people that I idolize. Those are the people that are most successful in my eyes. So anyway, thank you for letting me share the morning with all of you. I hope you appreciated the story, and good luck with everything you're doing.